For centuries, the image of the Prophet Muhammad has inspired, well, over 1 billion people. But what if the picture we have isn't the whole story? What if there's something more, something crucial we've missed?
And that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. You know the Prophet Muhammad, but which one? Because you see, history hasn't just given us one version of him, it's given us several. And figuring out the difference, well, that's everything.
In fact, you can basically boil it all down to 3 main portraits. 3 very distinct and yet sometimes competing versions of the exact same man.
Okay, so let's break this down. 3 prophets, 1 truth. First, you've got the prophet seen through the eyes of the hadith scholars, the folks who collected all his sayings. Then there's the prophet of the Sufis, the mystics. And finally, the prophet you meet in the Quran itself.
So you've got these 3 major portraits, and each one has shaped how millions of people see their faith. The idea here is that 2 of them are, well, they're a bit incomplete. They zoom in on just one part of who he was. But the third, that's where we get the full picture. So let's start with that first one.
All right, first up, the prophet of words. This is the version that comes to us mainly from the hadith scholars. And in this picture, he's defined almost entirely by what he said. He's a figure known first and foremost for his speech. And this quote really just hits you, doesn't it? If he did nothing but speak, how else could we explain the existence of 1.2 million narrations? I mean, think about that number, 1.2 million. The sheer volume paints this picture of someone who did little else but talk. It's a pretty sharp critique, and it makes you question the balance of it all. And here's the problem with that image, right? You end up with this model of a leader who just talks, who commands from a distance, where words are totally separate from actions. It creates this dynamic where the leaders talk and everyone else is supposed to do the work. It's a really passive model, and honestly, not something you can easily copy in your own life. Okay, so now let's switch gears completely. Let's look at a totally different image of the prophet. This is the prophet of the Sufis. And here, the focus shifts away from words and logic and zooms right in on the heart, on emotion. And, well, things get a little supernatural. And this quote nails the central argument against this version. This isn't describing a role model, it's describing an angel. I mean, think about it. The moment your role model becomes superhuman, angelic, how are you supposed to follow in their footsteps? They stop being a practical example and become something else, something you just admire from way, way over here. And look at how specific this gets. A voice louder than anyone else's, the physical strength of 40 men, sweat that smelled like perfume, like musk and amber. These details, whether you take them literally or not, they build an image of someone who is just not on the same plane of existence as the rest of us. And this slide just lays it all out so perfectly. He becomes this unreachable ideal, someone you worship, not someone whose life you try to live. And it creates this gap. It's easy for people to say, well, of course he could be that perfect, he was superhuman. And you know what that does? It kind of lets us off the hook from doing the hard work of trying to follow his example in our own very messy, very human lives.
So that brings us to the third portrait. And this is the one presented as the real deal, the prophet you find right there in the pages of the Quran. And this is a picture of a complete, whole, integrated human being.
The Quran calls the prophet an uswa hasana, which means a beautiful example. And the logic behind this is so simple, but it's also incredibly profound. You can only really follow the example of something that's like you, right? A human can't take a wall as an example, or an angel. So to be the ultimate example for all of humanity, the prophet had to be fully 100% human. So this model from the Quran is all about balance. And it starts with the heart. We're not just talking about feelings here. This is about deep spirituality, real mercy, and a constant personal connection to God. You see it in how he spent his nights in prayer. But it doesn't stop with the heart. It also includes the mind. You know, he was a brilliant thinker, a strategist who literally built a new society. He was a wise teacher who had to deal with incredibly complex social and political problems. This is a portrait of a powerful intellect at work. And then, and this is so important, it includes action. This prophet wasn't sitting in an ivory tower. He was a leader, a reformer, a man who got his hands dirty. He struggled, he served his people, and he faced life's challenges head-on. Heart, mind, and action, all working together in one person. Wow, this slide just puts it all together, doesn't it? Look at this incredible balance. On the one hand, at night he's weeping in prayer, totally humble. But then during the day, he's a decisive leader, a warrior. You see this immense mercy, praying for the very people who just wounded him at the Battle of Uhud. and you see that balanced with this unshakable strength when he's confronting a tyrant. See, these aren't contradictions. This is what a complete human being looks like.
So the big question is, how did he do it? How did he achieve this perfect balance? Well, the source gives us one last, really powerful idea. The prophet wasn't just the guy who delivered the Quran. He was the guy who was the Quran.
This right here might be the most famous description of him ever. When his wife Aisha was asked about his character, she just said, his character was the Quran. And that's the whole key. It means if you wanted to understand the book, you just had to look at his life. His actions were the living, breathing translation of the words on the page.
I just love this analogy. It makes so much sense. The Quran is the raw material, right? It's the pollen. And the prophet, he's like the bee. He takes in this divine message. He processes it through his own human life, his struggles, his joys, his decisions, and he transforms it into something everyone can benefit from, something tangible, nourishing. He turns it into honey.
So you see, a prophet's job isn't just to be a delivery guy who drops off a book and says, here you go. The whole point was to make the divine word human, to show what it looks like in practice. He was literally the Quran on 2 feet.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. If the prophet's life was the living version of the scripture, a book that we can all read through his example, then the question isn't just some historical puzzle. It's about right now. It's about us. The prophet was a Quran on 2 feet. How does that book read in your life today?